It's 8 o'clock, which means it's time for the Watchdog. A very good evening to you. I'm Peter Ndoro. Thanks for joining us, and I'm standing in for Vuyon Vogo on the show tonight.
I've taken the decision that I will be taking the report to judicial review. Okay. I'll take it, as we believe there are areas in the report that require that action.
Energy Minister Mantashse and former Water and Sanitation Minister Nomvula Mokonyane have been implicated in the third installment of the state capture report released last night. Political analysts Levi Ndo, Theo Fenter and Khanyi Magubane will be helping us work through some of the issues that were raised in this particular volume. We'll also be taking a look at the South African Local Government Association, Salga's conference, which began yesterday, and the latest from the UN on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. The Watchdog begins right now. The Zondo Commission, which investigated allegations of state capture last night, delivered its third report to President Cyril Ramaphosa. The fourth part of the report covers allegations against Bosasa, now the African Global Operations. The company reportedly paid kickbacks in exchange for lucrative government contracts. Former Bosasa COO Angela Ogrisi testified to this, implicating Energy Minister Mantashse and former Water and Sanitation Minister Nomvula Mokonyane at the Commission. Ogrisi himself was accused of offering gratification on behalf of Bosasa to former MP Vincent Smith in exchange for his influence.
Evidence around Bosasa under the spotlight. The State Capture Commission has now submitted its much-anticipated third report. During the Commission's work, evidence around Bosasa was amongst the interesting testimonies. During his testimony, Angela Ogrisi became a star witness implicating top guns of the ANC. Now the damning report is out, the evidence reveals that there was widespread corruption in the awarding of contracts and tenders to Bosasa. The report, amongst its findings, found out that Nomvula Mokonyane, in her various positions, breached her oath of offices in terms of Section 96 of the Constitution. In terms of Section 96 of the Constitution, a member of cabinet is prohibited to expose him or herself to any situation involving the risk of conflict between their responsibilities and the private interest. The report suggests that Mokonyane be investigated for possible corruption.
I do think as well that the National Prosecuting Agency will be under tremendous pressure. They have now a new head of the unit that is going to focus on some of these prosecutions that will need to flow from the Zondo Commission. And I think that it is going to be so much pressure. The NPA is already under pressure. They have a backlog of cases.
During the testimony, another issue that raised eyebrows: the security upgrade installed at the then ANC Secretary General and now chairperson of the party, Mantashse. On this issue, the report concluded that there is a reasonable suspicion that Mantashse received the free installations, knowing that Bosasa sought through him to influence unnamed office bearers. However, the Commission says there is no evidence that Mantashse acted upon this. Another casualty of the Commission's work was ANC MP Vincent Smith. Smith is already facing pending charges of corruption, fraud and conspiracy to commit fraud. On former Deputy Minister of Correctional Service, Thabang Makwetla, his issue also security installations.
The report will leave the party even more and more divided. Because now it's not just about the factions, it's about the report that even implicates those that are at the center of power now, not just those that are displaced from power. So it raises a concern, and people will ask President Ramaphosa, will be expecting him to also do something in line with what was said by the report.
ANC MP and former National Assembly chairperson Cedric Frolik was not also spared. He will face investigation based on reasonable prospect that further investigation may uncover prima facie case of corruption. Fireworks came when former President Jacob Zuma refused to reappear at the commission. The commission says a significant portion of the evidence against Zuma on Bosasa is hearsay, but hearsay evidence is admissible in the commission's proceedings. It calls for more investigation on the basis that there is a reasonable prospect that such further investigation will uncover a prima facie case of corruption. Responding to the findings of the report, the Zuma Foundation has rejected the findings, stating that the former president wasn't afforded a chance to testify.
The implications of this report on the ANC, the current state of the ANC, and the position of the ANC in government, it is so significant that the ANC should actually make it very clear what they plan to do.
Ntantla Khatlhane, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Energy Minister Mantashse has rejected the findings of the state capture report. He was addressing the media in Pretoria a little earlier today. The Commission has recommended that Mantashse, former President Jacob Zuma and former Water and Sanitation Minister Nomvula Mokonyane be investigated for corruption.
I've taken the decision that I will be taking the report to judicial review. Okay. As we believe there are areas in the report that require that action. I would therefore appreciate if you all allow me to get on with my work in government and in the party without hindrance of further speculation until such time that there is an investigation and there is a case to answer. I want you to underline, until there is a case to answer. The ANC has set up a committee to process the report, and I will subject myself to that process. But I want to refer you to only one clause in the report, which refers this me for investigation. It says there is a reasonable prospect that further investigation will uncover prima facie case against Mantashse. Basically, there is no prima facie case at this point in time.
That's the Energy Minister speaking a little earlier today at a press conference. Now, whistleblowers play a pivotal role in uncovering allegations of corruption, particularly in the state capture investigations during the Commission's inquiry, which was led by Acting Chief Justice Raymond Zondo. Now, one such individual is Angelo Agrizzi, who detailed the relationship between Bosasa, its related entities, and government officials. In a statement he released earlier today, Agrizzi thanks Justice Raymond Zondo for lifting the lid on corruption and pleaded with President Ramaphosa to protect whistleblowers after coming out. Well, to talk a little bit more on this, we're now joined by John Clark, who's an author and whistleblower advocate. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the programme.
Well, thank you very much, Peter. Looking forward to it.
So, right from the outset, it is not an easy thing, and that's really an understatement, isn't it, to be a whistleblower in South Africa and anywhere in the world, I guess.
It isn't, and in fact, what you left out, which I think is really important in terms of explaining my interest, is that I'm a social worker, first and foremost. And social workers are there to challenge injustice. We're there to kind of bring a restorative justice. So I've found myself sucked into this rather vacant niche of supporting whistleblowers after Mandy Wiener's book was published, The Whistleblowers. I'd helped her with one of the chapters there. And I just saw that the enormous psychosocial trauma that these folk go through, and I prefer to, in fact, use the term witness bearer rather than whistleblower, because the idea that they are carrying the burden of seeing and knowing a truth, which is an uncomfortable, very inconvenient truth, which they have to now try and get somebody to hear.
So typically, when you're doing your psychosocial assistance, what are the things that they bring to you that they most of the time are needing help with?
Well, firstly, a sense that they are scapegoated and that they are then have a retaliation against them for speaking truth. And these are not people that have necessarily signed up for this sort of job. I mean, I'm a social worker and an activist and a writer, so I kind of knew that there would be scrutiny when I started my career 40 years ago, and that I needed to, in a sense, prepare for it. A whistleblower doesn't actually go to work to look for wrongdoing. They find themselves caught up with it and then try and look for help. And unfortunately, the way our legislation works, it actually has a perverse effect because it makes people only allowed to internally report on wrongdoings. And then, of course, it's not just speaking truth about power, it's understanding the nature, the truth. Sorry, let me say it again. They don't just simply speak truth to power, they have to now address the truth about power, and which is that power doesn't like truth. I mean, that's like back in history, you can see that's always this tension between liberty on the one hand and power on the other. And their liberty then gets constrained, they are isolated, their families can't understand what they're having to go through. And my response to them is to help them step back and look at it in a larger frame. And then just what I've been doing working with them is just to manage the connective tissue between them and introduce them to one another. And out of that come a lovely solidarity where there's a sense of excitement that they actually can make a difference because they're not alone.
Angelo Agrizzi says that we could have had so many more witness bearers if there wasn't so many consequences for them. He says that the way that whistleblowers are treated is despicable. What is it that they face? I mean, we've seen people being killed, and that, for me, I guess, would be enough to put the fear of God in me, but there must be other things that they have to overcome even before they step forward.
Firstly, I mean, because you join a company, you're loyal, you want to help, you want to actually be seen to be a team player. And then, of course, there's this culture that then, of conformity and don't rock the boat. So the first thing they have to do is they have to find a support system outside of that organization that does support them. And they need legal support, they need legal advice. And then what really has been happening, and it is still happening, is the way in which there is often the weaponized use of disciplinary procedures against them. I mean, another one of my clients at the moment, Patricia Machale, is blowing the whistle on police corruption in the Free State and is finding herself mercilessly persecuted. And we've been trying to campaign around that. And my concern is that the Zondo Commission was a report to the executive. And before we can get to the judiciary and the legislature, the executive needs to take responsibility. And I would love to rather give up my seat over to President Ramaphosa to explain exactly why he isn't acting as he promises he will to ensure that they are not continually and continuously left feeling like they're the problem.
All right, we've run out of time, but I do want us to end with what can be done to create an enabling environment for witness bearers to come forward.
Well, things are happening. I'm very thrilled to see that there's the launch now of Whistleblower House, and we've seen other initiatives of people wanting to come together to do that. And I really, the great thing is that we do have a constitution and a Bill of Rights, which actually encourages, and in fact, for us as ordinary citizens to take responsibility, to hold the truth, hold power accountable, and to exercise our rights. And of course, you guys in the media, we can use the media as a platform to at least provide some protection and visibility for those whistleblowers so that they don't suffer the retaliation. And I'm particularly concerned for whistleblowers in rural areas, out of the way from the big city centres. And as a social worker, my concern is that they are the most vulnerable and disadvantaged. They're the ones that we need to actually go and reach out. And you can guarantee that that things will start to change.
John Clark, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much indeed for joining us on the programme.
Thank you so much, Peter.
Thank you. All right, so that's the plight of whistleblowers, making it difficult for them to feel safe, to come forward. And it's quite clear that so many more people knew a lot more, but just didn't show up to the Zondo Commission for one reason or another. And I suppose when you see what's happened to other whistleblowers, there could be understandable reasons why they didn't. Well, to unpack more of the actual report, we're now joined by political analysts Levan Doe, Khanyi Magubane and Theo Venter. A very good evening to you and welcome to all of you.
Good evening.
Thank you very much. Sir?
All right, I'm going to start ladies first, Khanyi, and I'm going to start with you. And for all of you, what your impressions are on this third installment. I know that you've read all 1,000 pages of it already, but let's begin by getting your first impressions on this volume. What does it tell us? I see President Zuma perhaps is spoken about more directly in this one.
Well, you know, Peter, for this particular installment, I can actually say the Zondo Commission has saved the best for last, because this is indeed the most hard-hitting and damning evidence that has come out, which has really placed the ANC at the very heart of state capture through a generally corrupt relationship between Bosasa and politicians and ministers and high-ranking politicians, as well as public servants. So I think that this is the final nail on the coffin, which I think the Commission intentionally waited until this point to release, because we see that it has also been released with a set of recommendations, and we've seen people like Minister Mantashse, Nomvula Mokonyane, the late CEO Gavin Watson, the former COO Angelo Agrizi, of course, being said that he is I could say for the most part, Zondo Commission said he was an honest, witness, but he still needs to face charges. So a lot of high-profile and high-ranking politicians have been implicated in this report, Peter, and I can't say we're surprised. You know, this is the culmination of a process that has taken a number of years and has really held the attention of South Africans. And now the big question for us is the ANC going to act against itself? Is it going to act against members of its NEC, members of its executive that have been implemented? I think that for me is what I'm most interested in.
Theo, again, what's interesting perhaps in this one is that it says and suggests that state capture predates the Guptas.
Yes, absolutely. If you read the Bosasa story, it was continuing for the better part of 18 years. So definitely that. But I would also say that this third part in 4 installments, what impressed me was the last part where the Commission made a point of analyzing its own terms of reference very, very meticulously. They haven't done this previously, in that they kind of explained exactly whether a case, whether Mantashse or whether it was Tabang Makwetla or whoever, in what way are they linked to the terms of reference. And I think that was also done on purpose if they want to take the report further and maybe challenge it in court or whatever. And then in the previous 2 installments, the use Zuma fled the Commission was used twice. In this version, they're much more circumspect, but hard-hitting in terms of Zuma not fulfilling his constitutional obligations and so on. So they haven't used the word again, like fledding or whatever they bent by that. But this time, I think the legality surrounding the president's actions was far more hard-hitting.
All right, Livando, your thoughts, and I wonder, does it set it up for the concluding part where people are expecting fuller recommendations and perhaps putting it all together for us?
Good evening, Peter. Good evening to the viewers at home and colleagues. Well, one is not surprised with the report that is coming from the Commission. If one has been following the proceedings at the Commission, there is a clear linkage between what went on at the Commission, the questioning and how answers were provided at the Commission, and now having to come to this situation. But what I've also observed is that the ANC, it's confirmed that the ANC has been involved, or it appears to have been involved, in a very questionable relationship with Bosasa. And what I would expect now would be that, indeed, the ANC, the government, and all those that are implicated should assist all of us to move forward and be able to close this chapter. I know it will not be easy. It will be a very difficult road to travel. But if we are serious about fighting against corruption, about ensuring that money that is meant to address serious challenges that we face in South Africa should actually be linked towards those challenges. And I think it is up to the ANC, the government, and all of us to ensure that we start doing things much better this time.
All right, let's start with Mantashse, because I think of all of the people that are named, that's the one perhaps there's going to be quite a bit of debate around. So, Kani, let's start with that. And I'm curious about the language that's used. The report says there's no link to corruption, direct link. However, he should be investigated, and that there are good chances that a corrupt relationship may be found. On the one hand, it sounds as if you're saying to someone, I think you're guilty, I couldn't prove it, but I'm sure somebody will be able to. Is that fair?
Well, I don't know about fair or not fair, but I think that where the commission is coming from is looking at the set of evidence that has been presented before it, and how many times the Minister Mantashse was named, in many of the evidence or the witnesses' evidence that was brought forward. I think it's on those bases that the commission is saying, although there's no direct link, but we think that if this matter is investigated, there may be a prima facie case. And we saw the minister coming forward later on this afternoon saying that as long as there's no tangible evidence against him, then he's going nowhere. And this is, I think, one of the biggest criticisms of the Zondo Commission is the issue of evidence, hardcore evidence, empirical evidence that he can produce to link individuals to state capture. And I think this is what a lot of the people who've been accused have actually been standing on, to say what the acting Chief Justice has given us is a beautiful narrative with no facts. How does he prove, a lot of what he said? Is he only basing it on the evidence that was brought forward before it by witnesses or SIU investigations of the Hawks or the NPA? Is there anything more that he's basing his allegations on beyond the testimonies that were brought before the commission? So I think that the commission, though, in its last report, the second report, said that its role is to do the work that it has been given as far as the terms of reference is concerned. It is not an investigative arm. The country does have the Hawks, the NPA, the Public Protector's Office, which is there for those purposes. So now people like Minister Mantashse will then now have to go through that process and actually satisfy a judicial process. And this is why he also said said that he's taking this on legal review to see if ever the acting judge president has overstepped his mark in implementing him in this report without any hardcore facts.
All right. Theo, an interesting situation here is that Mantashse was an ANC Secretary General at the time. So this isn't government. This isn't a minister that we're dealing with in this respect. And so he's an ordinary citizen, really. And I just wonder if it's a crime to get your house done by somebody. Because in theory, he could not have influenced the extension of the contract of Bosasa. Could he have as ANC Secretary General? Because then the link must be made that the ANC can influence government to hand out contracts.
Well, I think by extension, that is what the Commission is saying. And there's a specific part in the document, I think it's the second or the third one, where the judge took Mr. Mantashse on his statement that I'm just the Secretary General of the ANC, just another NGO, he called it in South Africa. And the judge took that sentence and he unpacked it a little bit. He said, well, it might be true in theory, like you've just said, but it makes you the manager of the ruling party. It makes you the organizer of all the important meetings of the ruling party where several of these things are discussed. So, Mr. Mantashse, you're far more influential than what you're trying to explain to us. And I think there is in the report a link, although it's not made clear or explicit, but the investigation into the so-called war rooms at Bosasa. Now, I can't think that a political party like the ANC would allow for an operations room or a war room or whatever you want to call it being established in Bosasa offices without the General Secretary being aware and approving of those
Theo,
things. So I think
Theo, couldn't that
there's a
be?
link.
But Theo, couldn't that just be a donation?
It could very well be a donation, but I think the influence, and that is, I think, where the Commission is going with the ANC, and that is to say that to make a clear distinction, like the President tried to do between the party on the one hand and the government on the other hand, is not a clear-cut division between party and state. There is all kinds of influences, and practical politics will tell us that's exactly how things work. You would call the General Secretary. He would speak to people in the NEC. A lot of them can be ministers or should be ministers, and that's how these links operate. It's not unique to South Africa.
Yeah.
Lobbying is a well-established situation in several countries. In the United States, it's even formalized. But I think the state capture investigation is trying to link corruption to that kind of linkages, and where, if you read the definition of state capture, where somebody outside government, without a mandate, not elected, that did not stand for parliament or whatever, influences government decisions. That is where the key and the crux of this commission is basically focused.
All right. Levi, I'm going to ask you a question. When you become an MP and you get a gift, you have to declare it. It's put in a register, and this is done for good reason. I wonder if senior political figures in a party can just receive gifts willy-nilly and they don't declare them. I mean, what is this scenario there? Because to have these security upgrades done to Mr. Mantashse's house and get gifts of birthday parties, etc., it's not a crime in itself, I guess, if we take out the corruption portion of it, but the receiving of gifts, is this something that they should declare, ought to declare? And if they do, the party then must say, hang on, why are you getting this?
That is the situation that we unfortunately facing in South Africa or even now. When all these things were happening, Mantashse was the Secretary General of the ANC. He was not a government official. Also at the same time, Bosasa was getting government contracts, and in return, Bosasa was funding projects of the ANC. And what I think most people would be asking would be that, was not Mantashse aware of the fundings that Bosasa is doing to the ANC and the business contracts that they do get? And what then would be the purpose for him to be getting favors from the very same company? And I think I want to link this with the evidence that was presented by Mr. Zizikodo, who also said that it appeared as if, once was testifying at the commission, that most people thought that because of his proximity to senior leaders of government, they thought that might be able to influence decisions, and that's why they were able to provide him with some of the gifts. And I think it's also important that leaders of political parties, because they are role models, should also be in a position to be able to declare whatever kind of gifts that they get, so that you do not have a relationship that might be perceived as a controversial or questionable relationship between these individuals and certain companies. Of course, one must acknowledge that in the report, the Commission says if indeed something can be investigated against Mr. Mantashse, there can be something that could be found. And I think if Mr. Mantashse is innocent and he knows that he has done nothing wrong, he should actually be opening his arms for any form of investigation so that he's able to prove to everybody that he's indeed an innocent human being. But I think it's important for leaders of political parties to lead by example and declare whatever gifts that they get, they receive, because that is also at the heart of ethics and indeed ensuring that you live a pure life.
All right, I'm mindful of time. I'm not going to go into former Minister Mokonyane because I think that's been ventilated quite a bit during the course of the day. But on page 770 of this volume, the National Prosecuting Authority comes up, Advocate Jiba comes up, and there's a recommendation that she also must be investigated. This should, for me, be a huge deal because of the work that they do. And I'm sure, Kanye, that the MPA almost has to start there.
Well, I mean, we know that she, in many ways, has been implicated in trying to use the security, forces, not for security forces, but the cluster, state security, and the NPA also has said that she was very close to former President Jacob Zuma, and in many ways tried to make many of the cases go away, and that she has to be also investigated in all of this, and her role in it also has to be looked at quite clearly because she is a senior official. And we know that just before there was testimony given in the Zondo Commission, there was an attempt by the officials to stop those going to testify from testifying. And I think that Domkawachi definitely should be looked into, and it would not be the first time that she's crossing the attention of law enforcement officers. We know that her name has been brought up many times before in terms of being very key and central to the syndicate, and looking at it from a state security point of view. She is said to have protected many members members of the RETs or the Zuma factions. She has said to have done a lot within the NPA to try and steer cases away from certain individuals. And that, of course, we know is hampering the work of the NPA. And indeed, I think that for this process to be taken seriously and for it to have the type of dignity that it needs to have, we need to have officials that are above reproach.
Theo, I mean, the report talks about sensitive NPA documents that were leaking regularly in this Bosasa affair. I would imagine that Shamila Batohi has to find out who it was, because some of those people might still be there.
Yes, absolutely. Some of those people are still there, and I think several names are mentioned, and how these documents leaked, and even that certain people indicated that they have a constant problem with the NPA investigating Bosasa and all kinds of things. So I think your question is very much to the point. That is definitely something that will have to be investigated. She is now out of the NPA. She's not there anymore. And a few other names are also mentioned. But I think that also gives us an indication why the NPA was for so long, 2 to 3 years, almost paralyzed in not being able to operate. And I hope with the current leadership and the newly appointed person in the place of Mian Cronje will do far better, and they have their marching orders in terms of this report.
All right, sadly we've run out of time, and we're going to have to leave it there. But I'm sure that we'll chat quite a bit with the fourth instalment still to come. But to you, Kanyuma Gubani, Levi Ndo, Theo Fenta, thank you so much for being great guests tonight. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, so those are my political analysts unpacking the state capture allegations into state capture report. And yeah, it looks like ANC has a lot to answer for, and some names, individuals. But mustn't forget that people like Angelo Grizzi says that he paid up to 80 people bribes, 27 million plus over a number of years. All right, we take a break, and the Watchdog continues right after this. Welcome back. You're still watching The Watchdog. Now, 64 out of the country's 257 local authorities are considered to be dysfunctional, and this is due to political instability, corruption and poor governance, amongst other things. This was President Cyril Ramaphosa's lament in a virtual address at the opening of the 6th instalment of the National South African Local Government Association Conference. President Ramaphosa made a clarion call to councillors and all those who will be elected into the new Salga leadership to urgently improve the lives of the people of South Africa.
Delegates from all spheres of government, academic institutions and stakeholders in the local government sector are gathering for a 3-day Salga conference in Cape Town. The national conference, which will elect Salga's new leadership, is held every 5 years and attended by senior decision makers in all municipalities made up of mayors, speakers, municipal managers and chief financial officers. This year's conference is themed Consolidating the Role of Local Government and Rebuilding Local Communities to Meet Their Social, Economic and Material Needs. The President cites a number of reasons why over 60 municipalities are considered dysfunctional and 31 are currently under administration.
This dysfunction is rooted in poor governance, weak institutional capacity, poor financial management, corruption, and political instability. Now, these are the challenges that our number of our municipalities face.
President Ramaphosa also addressed a thorn in the flesh for most municipalities.
To deliver on their responsibilities, municipalities must address poor revenue collection. Municipalities are owed billions by businesses, by government entities, and even government departments. It is therefore important that we should increase the level of payment, because if we do not increase our revenue collection, we will never be able to run sustainable municipalities.
Ramaphosa further said that local government must create an enabling environment for investment.
It is therefore at local government level where the local government itself creates that climate that you will be able to attract investment.
President Ramaphosa detailed ongoing efforts to establish a national strategic framework for local government through the district development model. The model puts local government at the center of all development and sector plans and programs to be carried out by government. Natasha Piri, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, to discuss this a little further, we're now joined by Nontando Ngamlana, who's the director of Ephesus Core Plan, and that's a development NGO recognized as pioneers in deepening participatory democracy and good local governance. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for having me this evening.
So Salga was put together many years ago, and part of its work is to develop and enrich and grow and provide skilling for our local governments, local municipalities. And I just wonder, when we look maybe just at the Auditor General's report each year as a yardstick, our municipalities are not working by and large. And I wonder if it is that they're not getting the skills, or that there is perhaps, I don't know, deliberate actions not to move forward.
Look, one has to, obviously, the Auditor General put it quite starkly in her last report when she said we don't have the right hands at the till. But it's not just the question of competency and capacity. It's also a question of political will at the highest echelons of deploying political parties who must ensure that competent people are deployed to local government. But I think also there has been an undervaluing of the role that local government plays and should be playing in the attainment of the country's strategic vision, particularly in addressing things like poverty, inequality, growing youth unemployment. I think the strategic position of local government in the attracting of investment is underplayed. And so Salga itself has not played a visible, meaningful role in championing, right, a campaign that addresses some of the challenges in local government. It has failed over time.
One of the things that we know about your work is participatory democracy, and I just wonder if us as citizens have a greater role to play in the way our municipalities work beyond local government elections, because it seems that that's the only real time we get involved, and the only other time is when sometimes we toy for services.
Well, the truth of the matter is that mostly across board, local government leaders are not available or accessible outside of elections, right? So election time, that is when they get to communities, that is when they're accessible, that is when they report on service delivery. And so when we see communities protest, oftentimes that is their attempt to call leaders to listen to their grievances of the time. And when we see communities, I mean, research has shown this over time, and our work has shown that protest action is the last resort that communities embark on. Oftentimes, they attempt to try all sorts of legal means to get their grievances listened to, but nobody cares. And so the disdain and the unresponsiveness and inaccessibility of local government leaders has led to the mistrust and the distance between the electorate and local government leaders. And so it then transpires through protests and all sorts of other unrests that we see in local government.
So Salga are sitting, they're busy having this conference. What should they be talking about and then doing to help our local municipalities move forward and move forward quickly?
Look, the conversations within Salga almost seem like they're stuck, right? Because conversations around professionalizing the sector, getting the right kind of skills in municipal governance and oversight structures like your municipal councils, reading or insulating, for want of a better word, municipalities for political interference, appointment of competent senior administrators, effective debt management or revenue collection are some of the conversations that Salga has had since days immemorial. And for some odd reason, it has struggled as a body to effect and implement mechanisms to effectively deal with these challenges. And so it does not seem like the conversation has changed in any way. It's still the same conversations that they've had 5 years ago. However, the different thing with the conversation now is the tone that we saw the president take with Salga. And I guess it is this decisive tone at the top that we're hoping that will translate into municipalities and ultimately translate into strengthening oversight, reading local government of transgressors in meaningful ways, and bringing through the system competent persons, both at the political leadership side as well as the administrative side.
Nontando, unfortunately, we've run out of time and we're going to have to leave it there. But one hopes that we can have this conversation again, particularly after this round of conference, and see the next steps that perhaps we can take. But thanks so much for joining us tonight. All right, we move on. And the United Nations General Assembly has... emergency special session has voted to condemn Russia's so-called military operation in Ukraine by an overwhelming majority, demanding that Russia immediately and unconditionally withdraw from Ukraine's territory, whilst reaffirming that the country's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Now, the resolution received 141 votes in favour, drawing 35 abstentions, including South Africa, with just 4 countries joining Russia in voting no. All right, to speak a little bit more about this, let's talk to Professor John Stremlow from Wits University, international relations expert, to give us his take on this. Prof, I guess a lot of people are going to be wondering, how does South Africa join the abstentions in a case which appears to be pretty clear?
Well, I'll let the South African government explain that to all of us, Peter. This is very, very new news that you're asking me to comment on tonight, but I think it's so historic that it's worth pausing for a moment. This was the only 10th time that the General Assembly has met in an emergency session since 1950. And what is interesting to me is how much has changed between the 2014 non-emergency, but nevertheless important General Assembly vote to condemn Russia's annexation of Crimea. At those days, it was 100 votes for condemning Russia. This time, as you noted, it's 141. And I think there were 59 abstentions and 11 no's. But with regard to South Africa, it was voting along with 15 other African states to abstain. But there were a number of interesting abstentions that you wouldn't expect. Vietnam, Laos, Bolivia, South Sudan, Pakistan, India, Iran, and even China, which was really surprising to me. The only ones who voted no, in addition to Russia, were Belarus, which you could expect, then the North Koreans, and Eritrea, for reasons I can't explain, and Syria. So there's an evident here isolation of Putin's aggression against the Ukrainian people that is worth noting. But you can ask me other questions, but it's pretty recent news.
Let's talk about the countries that did vote no, because it's I don't know if it's a coincidence, but they have drama playing out at home, don't they?
Oh yes, they certainly do, and Belarus has provided the access to the northern push into Ukraine by 30,000 Russian troops that were ostensibly there. We kept told that it was only a training exercise, but it really was to prepare for the invasion that Putin has been determined to do. And then North Korea, Eritrea, and Syria, well, we all know where they're standing. I guess I would like to just point out, because Russia has been president of the Security Council this month and has a veto. So the UN badly needs to be reformed, and South Africa has been advocating for this for years. But the European Union also this week did things that I never thought I'd ever see. It was a stunning development, both in terms of the sanctions and the amount of sanctions that they're willing to put on Russia, but also providing for the first time in the history of the European Union military assistance to an insurgency that's been invaded, that has been in response to the invasion of this sovereign state, this independent state by the Russian military. So that things can happen very quickly, Peter. And a lot depends on who's the leader. If you had Donald Trump in the White House, this would never have happened, probably. But Joe Biden worked very patiently behind the scenes, and also the European Union has come a long way, but also Zelensky talked directly to the Europeans. This is really history unfolding in a very dramatic way, but a profound way that is probably going to alter the face of European security for generation to come.
All right, Prof, we're going to have to leave it there. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but your insights always greatly appreciated. Thank you for your time.
Nice to talk, Peter.
Thank you. All right, that's Professor John Stremolo talking about this historic vote at the UN the Special Assembly that took place on the Ukraine, voting overwhelmingly to tell Russia what you're doing is not okay. Please leave Ukraine. All right, that's where we leave it. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. See you again tomorrow evening. In the meantime, please stand by for The Globe coming up with more on this Ukraine and other stories.